Welcome to The Grounded Leader, Ayurvedic wellness for leaders who want to succeed from a place of balance. A podcast where ancient practices meet ambitious goals to help you operate with strength, clarity, and grounded intention. I'm your host, Shweta Vikram, an Ayurvedic doctor, trauma informed yoga teacher, award winning author, mindfulness coach, corporate wellness speaker, adjunct professor, and a lifelong student of what it really means to lead with clarity, purpose, and peace. Each week, we'll explore holistic wellness, how to excel in authentic leadership, and live with balance and purpose. Let's dive in. On today's episode of The Grounded Leader, I am super excited to speak with Shay Charles. He's a branding expert who transforms small businesses into memorable brands. His strategy methods and design chops have earned Shay numerous awards and the recognition of leading industry experts. And Shay is here to remind us of an important and beautiful life lesson today. And I'm thrilled to be talking to him. And I know all of you people out there, all of you listeners, are going to appreciate how transparent, vulnerable, and insightful Shay is. And I say this because 2 years ago, Shay was diagnosed with chronic fatigue syndrome. And we let Shay talk more about that. But this major turning point in his life would change how he would show up to life, health, business, and leadership. Welcome, Shay.
Thanks, Shweta. It's great to be here. I'm happy
I,
to be with you.
I am so excited you're joining us. And we've talked about this before.
Mhm.
Women, we still are given the permission by society to talk about certain aspects of how we work, manage our work-life balance, our well-being. But men are pressured into being stoic. I saw that in my father, I saw that in my brother, I see that in my husband, in my male friends, in my clients. And I'm so grateful to you for being here and starting to break those stereotypes. But before we get there, Shay, for listeners who are meeting you for the first time, can you briefly share who you are and what work you do today? And how did you get here? I know them like multiple questions. I said one question. And I say that, how did you get here? Because your journey hasn't been a straight line, has it?
No, it's not been a straight line. My name is Shay Charles. I'm originally from Nigeria. That's where I was born, brought up. I ended up coming to the US for design school at a ripe age of 28. And before then, I went to architecture school in Nigeria, became an architect. But yeah, I've had this creative journey, weaving from one design discipline to another. When I got here and went to a very prestigious school here, Savannah College of Art and Design. After graduating, I ended up working in fashion, which was a great experience.
Mm.
But then after that, I went off on my own and I started my own agency, which is called Brand Plus Design. This was something that was inevitably going to happen because I'm an entrepreneur at heart. And just with my upbringing, there was this mindset that was sort of placed inside of me, or that I cultivated, that I should be able to manage my own work life and, like create wealth outside of someone else's vision. So I've been doing this for a couple of years now. I started the business about 6 years ago, and it's been quite a journey. I've had so many life lessons
Mm.
from going through this path, such that, just working a regular job or just having a normal career path would not impact you in such a way. And I've heard somebody say that entrepreneurship really opens you up, like it cuts you up and then opens your insides out for you to see, and and for some other people to see,
Wow.
if that would be like, the people who are closest to you, or if you're even vulnerable enough, you can show this to your audience, or your clients. Um, yeah, it reveals how you relate with work. It reveals your relationship with money, your relationship with people, and how you value it, and also how you see the world and how the world is supposed to work. So that is, in a nutshell, that's somewhat like been my journey. I've learned something along the way, learned some things which I believe that I can share, especially where it comes to how my journey has impacted me mentally, psychologically, and physically. There's no way you can go through life and chart a path through your career or your work and not have some things impact you. And then you have to respond to those things with whatever tools you've been given, whatever mindset
Yeah,
you
talk to us a little bit
cultivate.
about that, Shay. When you and I were talking, one of the things I noticed in a post, I think, of yours was about it's almost like a comeback, right?
Yeah.
And comeback means different things to different people. But when you were diagnosed with chronic fatigue syndrome, and it changed your life.
Yeah.
The entrepreneurship, how poetically, provocatively you describe that. Like it's really being vulnerable and you're inside out, people say you, maybe not as much outside in. And when
Hmm.
that happened, how did it impact who you are, your work? Because you're an entrepreneur, I don't know how many people you have on your team, how much of it is allocated to others. And I think this can be a really good lesson, including me, for all of us entrepreneurs out there. It's not just about having systems in place, but before we hit or we end up hitting such a major turning point, were there signs physically, emotionally, mentally that you were feeling?
Oh, I mean, the number one emotion
Hmm.
that I was feeling was overwhelm all of the time. There was
Okay.
just a lot of overwhelm. And to some extent, I had what I think the term for it is alexithymia, which is an inability to actually feel, process your emotions and and move let the emotions course through you and then you move ahead.
You being telling us the story of what burnout can look like, what chronic fatigue can look like, and many high achieving people. It's a big part of our audience, leaders. And I think
Mhm.
everybody is a leader in their own right. We are so focused on achievement, we forget to pay attention to these signs. Like in your
Yeah.
case, you said there's this overwhelm. So, how does overwhelm, how did it show up in your life? Was it as your mind? Was it in your body? Was it in your daily conversations? Like, can you explain a little bit more to us so others can also listening can tune in like, oh, I might be overwhelmed, I might be going through something, it's not just a deadline.
Oh, yes. Overwhelm came in certain forms for me. I can first of all talk about some set expectations that I had of myself and of my business. I've
Okay.
always been a high achiever. Um, I've always been a perfectionist, so I had those really high expectations. And what they don't teach you in business school or what people don't really tell you, um, until you start to experience it yourself is that running a business, yeah, that there are ups and downs, and you have to figure out a way to move the goal or the mark that you're supposed to hit, and you should be as realistic as possible, or else it's going to cause burnout.
Mm.
And burnout has become so prevalent in our culture, like it's a badge of honor to be tired, to be exhausted at the end of the week. You hear someone say, I'm busy, busy all the time, and they even feel good about it. But yeah, that overwhelm is actually it can be something that's subjective when it comes to like the markers of success that you're giving yourself, and also it can be objective whereby like you're pushing your body to a certain extent where it can't just really take anymore, which is what I did. It got to a point where I had gotten so addicted to overwhelm that
Mm.
whenever I was working and I did not fill up all of my time and I wasn't intense, I felt like something was missing. And I noticed this the most when I worked in fashion because even though the work was, it was a lot of work, but I wasn't in overdrive as often as I was used to. And it was part of the reason why I kind of switched careers then because I wanted, yeah, I wanted to keep feeling this like overwhelm, which made me, which satisfied me in a certain way that I can't really explain to you.
So let
Um,
me ask you this. Did you feel at any point your busyness equaled your worthiness?
oh, absolutely. My busyness was tied to my worthiness. Um, like primacy of work is something that men deal with in terms of like their identity, and my busyness was absolutely equal to my worthiness. So that was it got to a point where my body just said, no, I cannot do this anymore. And
So it gave you the signs at the
it
start.
started
It
looking like,
gave you signs, the
yeah.
overwhelm, the burnout, you recognizing, maybe just, always feeling tired. I've heard this from clients like, I sleep, yet I never wake up refreshed. I rest, but I continue to feel tired. So you navigating all of that. And then was it like one day something happened, or you were like, no, enough is enough. I need to prioritize me?
Oh, one day something happened for sure. There was a
Okay.
breaking point, which is what typically happens to most people when you're in that state where you're moving that fast
Right.
and on that track. And it was an intense moment where my body totally it like I was having massive headaches. I could not leave the couch. And the epitome of it was when I started having some suicidal thoughts. That was when I reached out to my sister. I
Sorry to
told
hear
her,
that.
yeah, I reached out to my sister. I told her, hey, like, don't don't be alarmed. Nothing's gonna happen. What I want you to know that this is what's going on. And from then, um, I thought to myself, something has to change. You know,
Mm.
something has to change. And that was when I reached out for therapy. It was the first time I was actually approaching a therapist, and I started doing the work way back to, my childhood and everything, like unearthing and unraveling the reason why I had this relationship with work and why I felt like that was my value, which is, that'll be another podcast if I were to go into it.
Right. No, absolutely. And I think when I'm hearing you, I'm realizing that the one thing that often doesn't get discussed enough is how little space society gives men to be vulnerable, to say, I'm tired. You talked about it, like, part of the gender thing is like, as a man, and as a man, I don't mean human being, like, I speak in terms of the male, that gender is the being the provider, being
Correct.
successful, having that money. So did you feel that pressure growing up and throughout your career, having lived in different countries and continents? Was that a common theme you picked up on?
Oh yeah, absolutely. It's a common theme, but there are some differences. So growing up in Nigeria, I can say from my parents' generation, there was an emphasis on security, meaning that you have to make sure that you make enough money to be able to get by. So that's why they wanted us to be lawyers, doctors, engineers. You probably can relate this because you're
Very much
also
so.
from India.
Yeah.
We get each other. We're very similar in that way. Um, so like there was that pressure, which
Right.
is, the primacy of work tied to status and then also, financial success. So that in Nigeria, like coming from Nigeria, I already had those pressures. But then moving here to the United States, which it's somewhat different. Here, the work ethic and the way work drives the society is somewhat different from Nigeria. Um, it's more intense in a certain way whereby um, you're even though there are varying ways in which you could choose to live life here, there's wider. Um, but like if you're in the business world, you are expected to perform, especially as a man. Your performance, your
Mm,
ability to climb the ladder, the corporate
right.
ladder, your ability to do that without looking like you're sweating, without asking for help, and showing no emotion. That is embedded in this culture. And also your circle of friends gets smaller and smaller as you're doing all of that. So that pressure is something that men here feel in the corporate world, and it just needs to be talked about more.
Oh, I couldn't agree more. And this is just making me wonder if, these expectations of the culture that you grew up in, and I can, like you said, very much relate to it. Financial security, stability is very much a part of the Indian culture as well, much like the Nigerian culture. And then you move here where there is a certain influence of what masculine looks like. And so, did that also impact how you process stress or struggled internally? What I'm getting at is like in cultures, if there are cultures, I haven't lived in those cultures, unfortunately, where space is held for men to show up and say, you know what, something is not okay. I need a pause, I need a break. I didn't see that growing up in the culture in India. Definitely didn't see that after I moved to the United States. So, do you think these expectations and the stereotypes and the influences around masculinity also influence the way you process stress? Or you struggled internally, like you shared, but you didn't maybe admit it or acknowledge it. Maybe you admitted it to yourself, but couldn't acknowledge it, saying, something is not okay. I don't feel okay because of these cultural conditionings.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, one thing that I would say men deal with in this culture is the way we're socialized here is you must show no weakness. And being under stress or admitting to it
Mm.
is you showing weakness. So it made it really difficult for me to process stress. I can remember reaching out um, to friends who were men, and many of them, the advice that they gave me was
Ah,
push through it, which is what they do. I mean, they don't know any better. I know better now because I've been through the gamut of what I've been through. But not showing a sign of weakness, not showing that you're under stress, pushing through instead of stopping and assessing things and actually processing that stress because there's just nothing, there's life is always stressful. And we have a stress cycle that we have to complete, but pushing through just stops that cycle. And for men, there's just we feel that there's no space for that because we're socialized to believe that, that is a sign of weakness.
I'm also thinking about the grief of this moment, right?
Hmm.
That the version we are expected to be versus who we want to be today. And there's this sense of loss. And, holding everything together was clearly making things worse for you. And I'm so glad and grateful to know that, you have a sister whom you could open up to and say, hey, I'm not doing okay. So, aside from that conversation, was there anything else? Because in listening to you, I'm realizing the world around you, and I think that's true of most of us, right? Or at least 99% of us living in 2026, the world around us tells us push through. You know,
Correct.
don't be a baby. The pride is I have clients who tell, oh my partner works 80-hour weeks. Oh, I sleep 3 hours a night. Those are the stereotypes that, and to be able to become an advocate for your own well-being, saying, yeah, no, right now maybe 10 hours works for me. There might be times when I do 90 hours, but That's just realistic expectations of an entrepreneurial life, not a chip on my shoulder that, hey, I work 80-hour weeks, right?
Correct.
So, aside from talking to your sister, and you said you sought out therapy, was
Mhm.
there anything else that helped you to start to open up? Because if the world around you is so closed about and stoic, and it's again no one's fault, I'm not blaming anyone, it's just the world, that's the world we all live in. Was there
Correct.
anything else that helped you open up? I'm so grateful that we are having this conversation, but was there a mentor, another space that you explored? Sometimes people find meditation or a workout or art or so was there anything outside of your self-revelation therapy and your sister?
Oh, yes. I started some practices that I'd never done before, which
Mm,
really helped me. Like meditation was something I didn't do before, mindfulness, and I really started getting into that. Some somatic practices as well,
okay.
because I discovered that I was so disconnected from my own body.
Mm.
I needed to reconnect. Um, and yeah, so I started doing some other things like breath work. And it took this integration of things that I was able to bring together to start me on the path that I've been on now, a path of recovery. Um, and I also wanted to mention it's really interesting that I reached out to my sister first and not my brothers.
Wow.
Even though I have very close relationships with, especially the brother that's like 2 years older than me. That is a thing that societally, or I would say socially, um, it's not to me it just seemed as if it will not be fully acceptable for me to reach out to my brother who is even older than me,
Right.
to be able to be vulnerable like that. I opened up to my sister instead. But yeah, so I found all these practices that I've never engaged in before, that have led me to towards this path of recovery. Um, so that's basically it.
Yeah, I know. I love that because you're reminding us all that balance is relative in each of our lives, right? But it's not impossible. At any stage, you go through burnout, we fall sick. I've been there. I've been in the ER, almost died, had lost my ability to walk. All of that shenanigans happened about 8 years ago. And it was such a reminder of that busyness doesn't mean worthiness, but also just because you eat healthy, you exercise, doesn't mean absence of disease is presence of good health,
Hmm.
whether it's mentally, physically, emotionally, in all of those aspects, right? And for you to even seek out meditation and somatic practices, I hear this from a lot of my male clients. I'll tell you, like, I'm not flexible, I can't do yoga. And I was like, while I hear you, I disagree because you're mentally being rigid. I need you to be mentally flexible, and we can work on that. Physical flexibility is a whole other conversation. We'll get to that much later. So if you start to even show up to breath work,
Yeah.
you're giving life to your life. And the other thing that you said that stayed with me is that disconnection. And that's huge amongst us mere mortals altogether. The world that we live in, we constantly in survival mode. We feel this pressure. Everything should have been done yesterday. And I feel like men more than women, only because society has not created spaces for men to be vulnerable. Right? So that disconnection makes you functional. Like I have a client, he's like, no, I don't have a drinking problem. I just, come home, even before he's changed or wash his hands, opens a beer. And I'm like, that is dependability. I'm not saying you have a drinking problem, but you're so disconnected, you don't even know it's become such a habit. You don't even know if you enjoy beer or not. So this brings me to my next question that I've been wondering about, Shay, is what do you think happens to men emotionally and psychologically when they feel like they have to carry everything alone? When you just look at the statistics, women tend to outlive their male partners. And
Yes.
part of it is women have great community connection We talk to each other. We have our circles of our inner circle, outer circle, our coffee circle, all of that, right? We have these healthy pedigrees, which create this bond where I don't feel the pressure that I need to carry this weight alone. Like if I'm dealing with something in my personal life, I have one set of friends. If I'm dealing with something in my teaching life, I have other people. Something in my business life, I have another person I could talk to. What do you think happens to men, aside from your story, when they think, I've got to do this, I've got to do this by myself, and I need to carry everything alone?
That's such a great question. I think the first thing that happens to most men is they get affected emotionally. So there's a shutdown in their emotions because of the overwhelm, because they're feeling I have to carry all this on my own. And then it starts to affect their relationships. I think that's the next thing. So the
Mhm.
spouse, if it's a girlfriend, um, children, they start lashing out, they start, and then after that, uh, it starts to really affect the physical and the mental health. So, um, yeah, I mean, it really causes uh, it causes there to be a decline in the mental health of the person. And I think the last part is the physical health, which eventually causes men to step back from the work if they can. But the work is usually the last thing to go. It's the last thing for them to look at and question, like, am I fulfilling? Am I aligned with my purpose in this work that I'm doing? Do I have the correct relationship with this work?
Mm.
Um, so those questions don't get asked until later, but it's a progression that I've seen. Starts with the emotions to the relationships, and then mental and physical health before the work goes.
Just perfect sense because, in Ayurveda, which is an ancient medical healing system, 5,000 years old, that stems from India, it talks about mind, body, and consciousness. They are connected. So, what's happening in the mind, and for people who are wondering how this happens, in many ways, but depending on what's going on in our mind, the choices that we make will impact our physical health. Something as simple as, I don't have the time to sleep, or I'm too wired to rest. I don't have the time to exercise, right? So it is, and then there's the gut biome. 90%, 85 to 90% of serotonin, our happy hormones, are produced in a gut biome. So what we eat impacts how we think, and how we think will impact our food choices, and they both impact our physical and mental well-being. So that client who comes in, and I am not judging alcohol, I'm just saying the act of being so disconnected, where you open the door and you open that bottle of beer and you chug it down. It's not water you're drinking, it's not herbal tea, it's not even saying a hi to a partner, pet, child, or even turning on the television. It's almost like numbing yourself. And sooner than later, to what Shay said, it makes sense how it starts to progress. And for some people, it might show up physically first, for others, mentally, or it might be stronger, the signs and symptoms in one area as opposed to the other. So, Shay, I am, as we like, I'm trying to think of the best way to ask this question because I've always wanted to ask you this. After everything you went through, how did your definition of success change? You've been very successful. You won all these awards. That's one of the reasons I
Mhm.
mentioned it in the bio, and more details about Shay and how to work with him in the show notes, folks. But like, how did that change your definition?
Oh, wow. It's radically changed my definition of success after going through all of this. Now, how I see success, how I perceive it is wholeness,
Mm.
mind and body, healthy relationships. Next, a healthy relationship with work, and the through line through all of that would be being able to give a quality and appropriate response to every situation that you face.
Wow. So it's I love the wholesomeness that you bring. in how you show up for yourself. And you've become an advocate for yourself. And it's not your work that determines how successful you are, it's how you
Mhm.
thrive personally, emotionally, in a social way, in an environmental way, in a financial way. All of that defines success.
Absolutely.
And are
Absolutely.
aside from your meditation, somatic therapies that you talked about, and therapy and community of people who nourish you, is there any other practice or habit that you can share with our listeners? The one takeaway that they might want to, sort of explore, that if they feel like I am overwhelmed or I'm breaking down, obviously reach out to your medical health practitioner, a therapist, but something from your experience that's worked for you.
Okay, there's one thing I would not even call this a practice, but it's a question I ask myself when I get to that point where I want to cross the line
Mhm.
and put the work first or just work myself to the bone. I ask myself now, um, what am I willing to sacrifice? Do I want to sacrifice myself for the work? Or for like the promotion or am I willing to sacrifice that for myself, my well-being? If you can ask yourself that question every time you're nearing that point where you're pushing over into overwhelm or who you used to be, if you've taken a U-turn, it'll give you a lot of clarity and you would be able to choose yourself in that moment and say, hey, okay, this work does not need to be perfect. It doesn't have to be 98 out of 100. It can be 75, and the world is not going to end.
Oh, I
But then,
love that.
I save myself uh, from losing out because if you lose your health, this is one thing that many people don't think about. If you lose your health, it's game over. Like the game is over. So all of the money, all the accolades, all of that, all of the metrics that people normally used to measure success, if you lose your health, the game is over. You've lost.
Wow. So, for anyone who's listening right now, if you're silently struggling, but still showing up and performing on the outside, and for someone who feels like they're approaching their own tipping point, she just reminded us, if we don't have health and well being on our side, it's game over. Oh, this was such a great conversation, Shay. Thank you so much for being here, for sharing your story, and being such a good role model for other men out there who've been much like you, conditioned to believe like your busyness equals your worthiness, your success is all about the dollar amount in the bank, and pushing through, breaking yourself physically, emotionally is a manly thing to do. You breaking all those stereotypes by not pointing fingers, but by redefining success, by rebuilding your brand, your work, and reminding us all that there are second chances for each of us out there if we are wise enough to see them and not waste that away. Thank you for listening to The Grounded Leader, folks. If this episode felt grounding, share it with someone who needs permission to slow down.